Chapter 8, The Things That Darken the Heart. There are many definitions of yoga, and I've already mentioned some of them. Yoga as a movement from one point to another, higher one. Yoga as a bringing together, the unifying of two things. Yoga as action with undivided, uninterrupted attention. These definitions of yoga have one thing in common, the idea that something changes. This change must bring us to a point where we have never been before. That is to say, that which was impossible becomes possible. That which was unattainable becomes attainable. That which was invisible can be seen. One of the basic reasons many people take up yoga is to change something about themselves, to be able to think more clearly, to feel better, and to be able to act better today than they did yesterday in all areas of life. In these endeavors, yoga can be of great help, and it requires no prerequisites that must be fulfilled before we set out on this path. Just because yoga originated in India does not mean that we must become a Hindu in order to practice it. On the contrary, it is not even expected of a Hindu that he or she practice yoga. Yoga does not require a particular belief system, and if we already have one, it is not challenged by yoga. Everyone can begin, and the point at which we start is very personal and individual, depending on where we are at the time. Why do we set out on this journey at all? Because we sense that we do not always do what might be best for ourselves or others. Because we notice that we often do not recognize the things around us and in us clearly enough. And why does this happen? Because the veil of avidya clouds our perceptions. We can, in any given moment, be right or wrong in our assessment of a situation. But this is something we cannot tell at the time. If our view of a situation is false, then avidya is present and ensuing action will be clouded by it. In this way, avidya influences both our action and the results of our action, which we will sooner or later have to confront. We have already talked about the fact that, from the yogic point of view, everything is real and there is no illusion. Even avidya, the source of so many problems, has a value and is real. Everything we see and experience is accepted. This concept is called satvada. Yoga also claims that everything is in a state of change and flux. We will not see things tomorrow in the same way that we saw them today. This concept is called Parinamavada. If we follow yogic thinking further, we find that there is something that can perceive this constant change in things because it is itself not subject to change. This is Purusha, something deep within us that is really able to see and recognize the true nature of all things, including the fact that they are in a state of constant change. But Purusha is also cloaked with the same veil of avidya that covers the mind. I've already described how avidya is expressed and experienced in four different ways. One way is asmita, the ego. I'm right, I'm sad, I am a yoga teacher. These are the statements of asmita. We identify completely with something that might possibly change and may no longer belong to us tomorrow. Another form of avidya is raga, the desire to have something whether we need it or not. A third form is dvesha, which manifests as refusing things and have feelings of hatred. And finally, there is abhinivasa, or fear, afraid of death. We cling to life with all our might. These are the four possible ways in which avidya is expressed. The essential purpose of yoga practice is to reduce avidya so that understanding can gradually come to the surface. But how can we know whether we have seen and understood things clearly? When we see the truth, when we reach a level that is higher than a normal everyday understanding, something deep within us is very quiet and peaceful. And then there is contentment that nothing can take from us. It is not the kind of satisfaction derived from gazing at a beautiful object. It is much more than that. It is a satisfaction deep within us that is free from feeling and judgment. The center of this contentment is the Purusha. Yoga is both the movement toward and the arrival at a point. The yoga is that we are practicing and in which through practice we can make progress is called Kriya Yoga. The Yoga Sutra defines Kriya Yoga as being made up of three components: tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwar pranidhana. Tapas does not mean penance or castigation, but is something we do in order to keep us physically and mentally healthy. It is a process of inner cleansing. We remove things that we do not need. Swadhyaya is the process of gradually finding out where we are, who we are, what we are, and so forth. A rasan practice begins with precisely these questions. We take the first step by observing the breath and the body. We do this over and over again, hoping that we will, with time, develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and our current state. In this way, we also learn to recognize what our next step will be. If we follow the Yoga Sutra, this close connection with Swadhyaya holds true for every kind of yoga practice. The literal meaning of Ishwar Pranidhana is to yield humbly to God. In Kriya Yoga, there exists the free choice of accepting God or not. The meaning of Ishwar Pranidhana in the context of Kriya Yoga relates much more to a special kind of attention to action. We place value on the quality of the action, not on the fruits that can develop out of it. A normal course of action is to first to decide on a goal and then, bearing it in mind, start working toward it. But it can easily happen that the goal changes or even disappears. For instance, someone thinks it's necessary to make $1 million and spends 2 to 3 years working towards this end. Suddenly, this person discovers that this goal is really of no use. The goal loses its meaning and is replaced by another quite different goal that is much more important. We should remain flexible so that we are able to react to changes in expectations and old ideas. The more distance we are from the fruits of our labors, the better we are able to do this. And if we concentrate more on the quality of our steps along the way than on the goal itself, then we also avoid being disappointed if we perhaps cannot attain the exact goal that we had set for ourselves. Paying more attention to the spirit in which we act and looking less to the results of our actions may bring us. This is the meaning of Ishwar Pranidhana in Kriya Yoga. Avidya changes according to whether it is manifested as asmita, raga, dvesha, or abhinivasa. Sometimes it will manifest itself as anxiety. Other times it will appear as attachment, rejection, avarice, or so forth. The four aspects of avidya are not always present in the same proportion. Although they are normally all there, generally one or two are dominant and others are lurking in the background. If we feel modest for a while, it does not mean that we have overcome our self seeking tendencies. We never know when a particular form of avidya will appear even more clearly. It is like sowing seeds. As soon as they receive water, fertilizer, air, they begin to grow. Every seed grows best under different conditions and at different times. So it can happen that a desire, raga, drives us to do something that a pride or ego had forbidden. Or a desire to be noticed may become so great that it overcomes our anxiety because we have to prove what great heroes we are. We should never sit back smugly when it seems as though we are free of avidya, because the four faces of avidya does not always appear on the surface. We must remain aware of the fact that their power and intensity can go on changing. Sometimes avidya is scarcely visible to any of its forms, and sometimes it overwhelms us. Because there are so many levels of avidya, we must remain watchful and alert in our actions and maintain our efforts to lessen its influence on us. If somebody enjoys a clear mind and spirit for years on end, that certainly shows great progress, but suddenly avidya can hit him or her again like a earthquake. That is why we emphasize that a practice of yoga, the striving for deeper understanding, must go on until avidya is reduced to a minimum. A few days yoga practice and contemplation may help for a short time, but the benefits will not last forever. We have to place one stone on another. It is a gradual process. We have to engage in these practices constantly because although we may be further on today than yesterday, tomorrow we may slip back a step. We are required to be constantly active until the seeds of avidya burn and cannot germinate anymore. As long as the seed is there, we can never know if it will sprout or not. The practice of yoga helps us to prevent these seeds from germinating and growing again. Avidya is as closely related to non action. Even non action has consequences. The Yoga Sutra claims that whether our actions have positive or negative effect is determined by the degree of influence avidya has taken over them. The Yoga Sutra makes a distinction between two kinds of action: action that reduces avidya and brings true understanding, and the action that increases avidya. We increase avidya by feeding it and reduce avidya by starving it. Our actions encourage or discourage the growth of avidya. Everything we do in yoga, whether it is asana practice, pranayam, meditation, whether it is attentive observation, self searching, or the examination of a particular question, all have as their goal of to the reduction of avidya. Nothing we do is without consequences. Each of our actions shows its effects either immediately or after a period of time. Every action has a consequence. This can take the form of residue left behind by an action, which in its turn, influences the following action. For example, someone toward whom we have behaved in a friendly manner will take something of a friendliness into his or her next encounter. It is a continuous process. The first action influences the next, and so on, and infinity. That is the reason why it is best for us to remain alert on all actions. What possibilities are there for preventing actions with negative consequences? Actions that we may regret later. One possibility is dhyana, which in this context means reflection. Reflection can take many forms. For example, when faced with an important decision, you could imagine that what would happen if you did the exact opposite of what your instincts suggest. Try to make the consequences of your decision as real as possible in your imagination. No matter what it is and what you feel, before you make an important decision and take action, you should give yourself the opportunity to consider the matter with an open mind and certain degree of objectivity. Dhyana, in the respect, is a quiet, alert consideration and meditation. The aim is to free yourself of preconceptions and avoid actions that you may later regret and that may create new troubles, dukkha, for you. Dhyana strengthens self sufficiency. Yoga makes us independent. We all want to be free. Although many of us are dependent on psychologists, gurus, teachers, drugs, or whatever, even if advice and guidance are helpful, in the end, we ourselves are the best judge of our own actions. No one is more interested in me than me. With the help of dhyana, we find our own new methods and systems for making decisions and better understand our behavior. There are other ways of distancing ourselves from our actions than reflecting on how it would be if we were to act differently from what we intend. We might go to a concert or go for a walk or do something else that calms the thoughts. All the while, the mind goes on working unconsciously without any external pressure. In the pursuit of other activities, we gain a certain distance, however short it may be. Time becomes available to cast the mind over everything surrounding the decision that has to be made. Perhaps with ease and the distance, we will make better decisions. Stepping out of a situation in order to get better look at it from other standpoint is called pratipaksha. The same word describes the process of considering other possible courses of action. The time spent in dhyana is extremely important. Through self reflection, our actions gain in quality. Another notion closely linked to avidya is that of dukkha. Sometimes terms such as suffering, troubles, or sickness are used to explain the meaning of dukkha, but it is best described as a feeling of being restricted. Dukkha is a quality of mind that gives us the feeling of being squeezed. It is not to be compared with physical pain. There does not need to be any physical pain to experience a feeling of great dukkha. The level on which dukkha works is the mind. Dukkha is nothing but a certain state of mind in which we experience a limitation of our possibilities to act and understand. Even if we do not have a need to express our feelings in tears, somehow we feel disturbed deep within ourselves, painfully bound and restricted. When we feel a sense of lightness and openness within, then we are experiencing the opposite of dukkha, a state that is called sukha. The concept of dukkha plays an important part not only in yoga but in every significant philosophy of India. There is dukkha at different times in the life of every human being. We all have a goal of eliminating dukkha. That is what the Buddha taught. That is what Vedanta strives for. And that is what yoga tries to achieve. Dukkha arises from avidya. What is the relationship between dukkha and avidya? Every action that stems from avidya always leads to one or another form of dukkha. A very often happens that we do not see our avidya as selfishness, desire, hate, or fear, but we can only perceive the result. The dukkha. Dukkha can be expressed in many different forms. We never know how before it besets us. Sometimes we might literally feel as if we are choking. Other times we only notice dukkha in our thoughts and feelings. Irrespective of what form it takes, however, dukkha will certainly occur when our actions have arisen out of avidya. An action that is supported by a clear mind cannot conceal any dukkha within it. Consequently, there are actions that somehow never have any negative aspects. And there are others when we thought would be good, but later on we recognize that they brought us dukkha. Mhm. Dukkha can even arise out of our efforts to progress along the path of yoga. When we see something that we would like to have, there is no dukkha initially present. Dukkha begins to take hold when we cannot get what we want. People often feel that they suffer from this kind of dukkha precisely when they are in the process of improving their lives. They become so thirsty for real insight that they cannot reach this new quality of understanding and action as quickly as they would like. In the great spiritual literature of India, there are many stories of people who strive to become better but are in such a hurry and therefore achieve so little that they develop dukkha and are unhappy. And this happens despite the fact that they had tried to change something for the better. We also talk of dukkha when we cannot make ourselves comfortable in a new situation. Dukkha can arise from being used to certain things and insisting on nothing else. When our habits are disturbed, we feel unwell. If we cannot continue life in a habitual way, we experience it as a disturbance. This form of dukkha arises from our own actions, which have brought to us a feeling of satisfaction. Dukkha can also generate it from the other direction. Sometimes the process of leaving an old track that we realize is not good for us is painful and can cause dukkha. That is the reason why it is sometimes difficult to lay aside a certain behavior that we recognize as unproductive. The separation from a pattern we are used to can be very painful. It is up to us to find out why so that we can overcome the situation. Dukkha arises out of guna. To understand dukkha, we must understand the three qualities of mind described by yoga. These three qualities are tamas, rajas, and sattva, are collectively known as guna. Tamas describes a state of heaviness and slowness in feeling and decision. Let's say that a feeling of great lethargy comes upon you when you're supposed to give a speech. You would suddenly have a great difficulty in remaining alert. Your audience and you yourself would be discontented. And finally, you would experience dukkha. This kind of lethargy is what is meant by tamas. A different situation exists when it is really time to go to sleep, but the mind says, come on, let's go to the movies. You must go to the movies. How can you want to go to bed now? This quality of mind would like action, would like to dance. This quality is called rajas. also produces dukkha. The third quality of mind describes the absence of the other two. That is neither heaviness, lethargy, nor raciness or restlessness, but only clarity. This is called sattva. And from this quality of mind alone can arise no dukkha. These three qualities are subject to their own cycle. Sometimes one prevails, sometimes other. Only sattva, clarity, is totally positive in the sense of leading to a reduction of dukkha. Rajas and tamas can both lead to dukkha. For instance, if I really need sleep and want to go to sleep, then my mind is tamas, and that is good. But if I'm not to give a lecture or would like to listen to one, a state of mind that is predominantly tamas causes considerable difficulties. All the factors that lead to a occurrence of dukkha work in us as forces that reduces space and freedom and ultimately limit us. If we are alert enough, we can be aware of the play of these forces within us all the time. Through our yoga practice, we are attempting to become more aware of these moments within, to reduce the limitation that result from them and to avoid the occurrence of dukkha in the future. When we become aware of dukkha and see it as something to face, we are also able to find a way to get rid of it. That is why becoming aware of dukkha is the first step toward freeing ourselves from it. Finally, yoga claims that there is a state called kaivalya in which someone is free of external concerns that cause such disturbances and generate dukkha. Let's say I have a radio that means a lot to me. One day, my son breaks it. I'm furious and become angry with him even though he did not do it deliberately. Actually, I should not have become angry. It is only a radio after all. While I should not actually encourage my son to be careless, I must also be flexible enough to see what really happened. A little flexibility always reduces dukkha.